injustice, racial inequities. And the wonderful thing about Isabel Wilkerson, she writes the entire book, Caste, and never mentions race, because she recognizes that it's even deeper, higher wire than race. It's about the hierarchy that was put in place from the beginning since the first slaves arrived here. I think it's an important book for all Americans to read. And it's not like, it is reading history, but it's not like spinach. It's spinach with a lot of cheese sauce when you read that book, I would say. But I wanted to say something about what you were talking about. You know, I've been voting since my early 20s, and I think before I heard the Reverend Otis Moss, I don't know if you know him, he's a great pastor, Dr. Moss, at a church in Cleveland, Ohio. But in my early 20s, I was a young reporter in Baltimore, and I'd gone to a Black Caucus breakfast, and Reverend Moss told the story of his father, Reverend Otis Moss Sr., who had gotten dressed and had put on his best shoes. This was in the 60s, had gotten dressed and put on his best shoes on the day of voting and had walked 15 miles to get to the polls to vote. And when he got there, they said, "Boy, you at the wrong poll." And he turned around and went to where they told him to go, which was another polling place. And by the time he got there, it was too late. And then by the time the next voting opportunity came around, Reverend Moss Sr. had passed away. And him telling the story of his father, who had walked 15 miles in one direction and then another 5 or 6 miles in the other direction, and by the end of the day, you know, that was an all-day journey to be able to vote, and then not being able to, and getting dressed up and putting on his best suit. I now, every time I vote, I think about that. I vote for Reverend Otis Moss Sr., and I vote for everybody who had to stand in a line and count how many gumballs were in a machine. I vote for everybody who had to fight the poll tax. I vote for everybody who had been suppressed, and in the midst of that suppression, dared to understand that their voice still mattered, and they risked a lot, you know. So we're risking this year, I think, standing in long lines, and wherever you are, it can be either hot or cold, and you need to mask up and all of that. But people literally risk their lives knowing that people seeing them in line could mean that by the end of the week or the end of the day, somebody come down and burn your house down or destroy your family. And they still did it because they recognized what a sacred right this is. And what I believe is that without this sacred right, there is no democracy. And so the more you are suppressed, but the more you are suppressed and recognize that it is your right, and that forces you to, or allows you to have the will to continue, I think makes it even revolutionary. So, you know, down there in Texas, y'all got some oppression going on down there that is akin to before the civil rights movement. I mean, it's very much like what was happening in the 50s and 60s. And so I just admire the courage, because it actually takes courage and the will to know what you deserve and what every American deserves, and being willing to act on that. And so everybody who's on these calls today and going forward, trying to not only do what you can do in your own voting, but to encourage that of other people. I mean, it's the good, great work, I think, to be powered by the people.
There's a video making the rounds today, shot by a reporter in Sewanee, Georgia. It's population 21,000, and in that small community, people are lined up on the first day of early voting, 4.5 hours deep, a half mile long. And on the one hand, I am so proud of them for doing that. I know they're doing that for themselves and their families. They're doing that for all of us. And on the other hand, it hurts so much to know that we are forcing our fellow Americans to do that in the midst of a pandemic that has claimed the lives of more than 214,000 of our fellow Americans. And that line, unfortunately, is not there by accident. It is there on purpose and by design. And so I just want to echo what Oprah just said to the more than 1,800 people who are on right now, 1,800 people who signed up for a volunteer shift to make phone calls to voters in Texas. Your calls to these voters will help them get over and past that. You'll be able to tell them they can vote early tomorrow in any county in Texas. You'll tell them that the hours that those polling places are open. You'll tell them what they need to bring in terms of voter identification. And you'll probably help many of them make the commitment to vote. Some may have been scared or wondered, given some of the tactics we've heard about lately in Texas, whether they're supposed to vote at all. You're going to give them assurance and help develop or bring out the courage in them, because it does take some courage to do this right now for some people. But once we do, the things that we can achieve really are beautiful. We could have a majority in Texas that could fight for voting rights and dismantle this infrastructure of suppression. This state, this non-voting state, could come into its own. But it only happens with the volunteers who are making these phone calls. There's one last question, Oprah, I hope that I can ask you. It was submitted by one of the volunteers who signed up. His name is Jose. And he says, so many of us are so anxious right now and so fearful. He didn't say why, but I can imagine the pandemic, the recession, the open racism in which our president traffics, the threat of violence and the use of violence against so many right now. And Jose asks, should we have hope that this election will fix things? And so I told Jose that I would ask that question.
We should have hope that this election, should the right person win, will move us in the right direction. You know, nothing is resolved, nothing in your life, in our individual lives, is resolved by just one thing. And so I'm always looking, particularly in times of crisis or struggle or uncertainty for myself, what is the next right move? Well, first of all, those of us who can be on this call and who don't have COVID or who have overcome COVID, we have first and foremost to be grateful and thankful for health and breath. So I always start with, what do I have instead of what I don't have? And so during this time of COVID, more so than ever before, I've always practiced gratitude. Gratitude is the foundation of my religious, spiritual practice. But I start with, what do I have? And what we have, Jose, in this moment is our health, our continued health, we hope and pray for. We have the strength and the will to make life better for ourselves through our vote and to do that for other people. And so I think without it, we are doomed. And with it, it gives us hope that we are moving in the right direction. And one of the things that's gotten me through, if I just may add, gotten me through this time, my most fervent spiritual practice is to remind myself of my breath, literally, physically taking breaths and reminding myself that in this moment, I'm okay. In this moment, all is well. Not worrying about what's going to happen, not even in the next moment or next week or next year, but in this moment, and just living each moment, giving praise, giving thanks, thanksgiving for what we have and what we're now willing to do together as a community. And listen, we know that there's strength in numbers. We know that psychologically, physically, there is power in numbers, and this power by the people will have an impact. And so for everybody who is here today, know that you are doing the good, great work. This is what we were meant to do. We were meant to come together, to not just to serve ourselves in life, but how do we use, that's always my question, has been my question since I was a young reporter. God, use me. How do I use myself for something that's bigger than myself? How do I use what you've given me, the talent that you've given me, so that I can use that in a way that benefits not just me? One of my favorite quotes is from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, not everyone can be famous, but everyone can be great because greatness is determined by service. And so I know we live in a world of Instagram and social media where everybody wants to be famous, but the truth is greatness is determined by service. And whenever you shift the paradigm of whatever work that you're doing, whether you're a teacher, a lawyer, a clerk, a dentist, if you an artist, you shift the paradigm to how do I use what I have to serve? How can that be of service? It changes the work. It changes the value of the work to the other person and changes the value and meaning of the work to you. So, Jose, what we have in this moment is our ability to serve, and that ability to serve creates greatness amongst all of us as a group, and that is how we move ourselves forward.
Oprah, everything about you and everything you just said gives me so much hope, and it reminds us of what our purpose is right now in making these phone calls. And I don't know, and you don't know most of the thousands who are on about to make these phone calls, but they're taking time out of their lives, out of their day. They're screwing up the courage to call a complete stranger, and that can be an anxious, that can be an anxious phone call. And I know from making them, and I've made a million of them, and I still get anxious before I make each one of those phone calls. Who knows?
Why do you get anxious? Tell me, why do you get anxious, Beto? Oh, can I tell you this? That
Yeah.
My very first job, not many people know this, my very first job, I started in radio by the time I was 16. But before my radio job, I was working for a vacuum cleaner company, like called Deluxe, and my job was to call people all day long to ask them if they would allow us to come into their homes for a Deluxe vacuum cleaner demonstration. And I can't tell you the number of people that hung up on me in those early days. So I used to have this sort of like fear about it. And then I developed a way of like, well, if they hang up, that means I spent less time with somebody who didn't want to hear me and gives me more time for the next person who does want to hear me. So that's how I'm looking at it.
So I get a little bit anxious. What is this person going to say when I say my name? What are they going to say when I make the pitch to, get a plan to vote? These are not the most rational anxieties or fears, but I have them nonetheless. And I know a lot of other people do who tell me that they're anxious about making calls. But Oprah, when I finish a shift, I feel so fulfilled. I now have agency in the midst of what otherwise is just a mess. I have function, I have purpose, and I'm not a bystander. I'm not a witness. I'm not in the audience. I'm in the game. And I think that this, for so many of us, is the antidote to despair. And the key to winning is to be making these phone calls. And I think in part because they're so hard, they can be so hard, they are so fulfilling. But I'm going to take your advice from your experience selling the vacuum cleaners and apply that to my phone banking from now on. And I know I'm going to be more successful. There are so many people who are tuned in to make phone calls, again, in large part because they knew they were going to hear from you. And so I just wanted to give you a chance to address all these volunteers who are about to go out there and hit the phones for a couple of hours. And we're already at 950,000 phone calls made. So we'll clear 1 million in this shift, thanks to Oprah Winfrey. And so, and thanks to these volunteers who came out for you. I don't know if you have a message for them.
My message is deep, deep, deep gratitude and appreciation. And, every person comes to the planet with something that they alone can offer. And that offering comes in as multitude of ways as there are people. And you're volunteering here today. You're saying, yes, I will do what I can in this moment. Yes, I will have agency. Yes, I won't sit back and just complain about how terrible things are. Yes, I will do what I can to move us forward. It's a blessing. It's a blessing and a gift to our nation, and I want to thank you for it. And I'm going to stay on and listen to what the rules are for the phone calls, because I'm going to try some phone calls too. Normally when I call people cold, I have to spend, 3 minutes explaining, yes, it really is me. It's not your cousin. Yes. What can I say? What I can say, we'll be back in a moment. Do I sound like myself? You know, so I'm going to stay on and listen for what the rules are. And is there a time limit? Are we supposed to stay on for a certain amount of time? Give yourself a certain amount of time, or
as long as you want, and I mean that so sincerely. All we're asking folks to do is to make a plan to vote tomorrow or sometime during early voting. So simple, and so many of the phone calls I've made today have been so positive. Folks are glad we called. They didn't know that early voting started tomorrow, or it was a reminder to make a plan.
Good.
So these are easier than selling vacuum cleaners. I promise. These are going to be
easier than selling vacuum cleaners.
Thank you for joining us, Oprah. We just cannot thank you enough. This made our year. Thank you.
Thank you. Powered by the people.
Let's do it. Oh wow.
All right. Staying on for instructions.
So we're now going to in just a minute. I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who's going to give me and Oprah and the nearly 2,000 people who have signed up for a volunteer phone banking shift and are on right now. We're going to give you instructions to make this very easy for you. And again, beyond all the instructions and the dialer and all that stuff, just remember you are talking to another human being, another American. So if you're smiling when you call, if you're kind, if you're gracious, if you're listening, those always turn out to be better phone calls. And know this is really important. There are a lot of political ads right now on TV. You may get them in the mail. You may see them on social media. Those may or may not have an impact. I don't know. No one will ever forget that you took the time to call them. Okay, so this has the greatest impact of anything that we do in our political process or democracy, and you all are doing it. And so I cannot add to the thanks that Oprah just gave you all, but I do want to thank you as well. I want to recognize some other VIPs who are making phone calls